Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of Rich Connectedness podcast series. I'm Dr. Shima Beigi, founder of Mindfulness Engineering and Rich Connectedness ambassador at ideaXme research platform. Today, my guest is Dr. Harry Halpin. Before introducing him, I think it's best to ask him who is he and what he does, and let him explain about himself. So, Harry, who are you?
Yeah, so I'm a computer scientist and a technologist. I did my Ph.D. at University of Edinburgh looking at machine learning and artificial intelligence. And that's where I got it. I heard of Shima's work, for example, looking at collective intelligence, extended intelligence, and these sort of concepts that try to push the boundaries of artificial intelligence. That being said, after I finished my PhD, I got very worried about the potential for artificial intelligence to be used for things which I, politically didn't agree with, such as the invasion of privacy, mass surveillance, behavioral manipulation. And so I kind of turned away from artificial intelligence and started working with the European Commission in particular on looking at privacy. How can we build technologies that are private? And we spent years in France at INRIA working on these topics, but we had this fundamental problem. And this fundamental problem is that in order to build new kinds of protocols, new kinds of infrastructure, which will fundamentally change the entire web, we really need massive support. And even a body such as the European Union can only provide so much support. And so what happened around the same time is that cryptocurrency started taking off. And interestingly enough, I found a lot of people with similar concerns around privacy, but based around concerns around, who knows, who can control their money, who can censor their freedom of speech. And while these weren't maybe my exact traditional concerns, I found it amazing that we now had this global community of people working in cryptocurrency, but they also needed to be up to date about some of the potential negative effects of artificial intelligence and mass surveillance and machine learning. So that's why I left academia last year and created a company called Nym Technologies, which is a startup. And the goal of this startup is to create basically private internet access and allowing people to share data where only you and the person you're sharing with really knows about whatever it is you're sharing, and that no one else, no outside observers, anyone from the NSA to cyber criminals to maybe even, if it's just your parents spying on you or angry coworker, none of them can learn about what you're talking about or sharing. And I think that's really a precondition for human freedom. And it's even more important to have that kind of privacy today, given all the surveillance due to Corona.
Thank you so much, Harry, for sharing this. So we speak about, for example, the concerns that you had on privacy. And I would like to connect it to the current situation that we are all facing, that we're all impacted by this, by the crisis of Corona. How do you see the issue of privacy can change or will be changed after this pandemic or during this pandemic?
Well, it's weird because on some level, we've all become more private individuals. If you're lucky enough, you're quarantined with your family, your friends, your relationships. But many people now are separated from people that they love and care about and that they trust and that they really want to have, as you put it, they really need to have a very rich connection with. And so people are naturally gravitating towards the internet to have these connections, these which are sustaining for them. And this includes not just personal connections, but also work connections. You know, a lot of people, including our company, we have to do all of our work online. We had an office in Switzerland, we had an office in London. We're currently not even allowed back in those offices. And it's going to become harder to have the kind of serendipitous encounters at, for example, uh, in parks and in restaurants and at conferences, when all these things are either shut down or, like, academic conferences or industry conferences, moving purely online. And so on some level, this we're facing an increased digitization of our entire existence, right? So everyone is going to be, what we're doing now, which was unusual, maybe a few months ago, with podcasts, talking to someone over Zoom, maybe not something that everyone did all the time. So people are going to probably over the next month or two, if not longer, have the majority of their conversation over. And the problem with that is that all of a sudden, when I'm meeting you at a restaurant, I know there's people around us. If I want them not to hear, I can lower my voice. I have an intuitive understanding of the social connections and social context of my surrounding, and that the understanding is very deep, right? It evolves of how we dealt with tribes and the quote unquote Dunbar number and all of these things over many millennia. And now we're put in a situation where our social connections are digitally mediated, and we don't know who can hear us. We don't know who can overhear what we're saying. We don't want to whisper, but then we're in a situation where it used to be very difficult, for example, to completely record people's conversations. Now with conversations over Zoom, there's security leaks, there's debates about its end-to-end encryption, there's privacy issues, how it sends your data to Facebook. When I move my eyes to another part of the screen or something and change windows, the host can be notified. There's a lot of possible privacy violations in even software that we're going to be forced to use a lot more, like Zoom. And there's a lot increased power of mass surveillance. If all of our communications are digitized, they could be more easily captured. And if they're more easily captured, they can be more easily used to feed into machine learning algorithms to attempt to manipulate us and control us, or to predict our behavior, which all sort of, to some extent, the same thing. And this is good to some extent. It's good that we're obeying quarantine. We're having conversations over Zoom. It's also good that we have this technology. Imagine if we were stuck in our houses without the internet. And there's proposals which could help even more about how to do contact tracing. And we would want to do contact tracing with privacy. Like, how do you find out the people you've met who have corona? If you have corona, how can you notify them easily? But at the same point, we don't want to accidentally walk into a kind of mass surveillance nightmare of the kind that people would associate with countries like North Korea, just due to lack of foresight and lack of thinking about the long-term impacts of surveillance and corona. Because obviously, with corona, it's a really good excuse to put in more devices and more surveillance and change laws. But the real question is, when you give governments these emergency powers, will they ever give them up? Will they ever withdraw the surveillance? Will they ever withdraw the ability to put people in jail without proper cause, without due process? And these are pretty big changes we're seeing in society right now due to corona. If society, I think, comes together, we can collectively fight corona, and we can do so in a way which doesn't violate our privacy. It's going to require a lot more and better technology. Or we could just be scared of corona and hand away our privacy and freedom, which are very tightly interconnected, to governments and companies that will probably never give it back. And that's really unfortunate, because it took us hundreds of years as a society to achieve these kinds of fundamental freedoms, and we should probably keep them for our children.
Very interesting, the points that you made, especially the connection between this paradox of privacy that we are being given by the social distancing, staying at our homes and our own places, but at the same time, the increased demand for basically social media platforms and other digital platforms. So suppose that this situation continues another 3 months or 4 months, or let's say until end of summer. So it's going to be a kind of new normal developing, whether we like it or not. So as tech developer, as someone that is an activist in the area of privacy and liberty, what do you think? And what do you think, how do you think these problems that you just mentioned, these scenarios that you just set out, and then that our freedom somehow been taken away from us and been given to the companies that can feed off on this data and information. How do you think, as a developer, as someone is at front line of these subjects, can ensure that these fears are being basically raised right now as we are basically developing these capacities, and how countries can collaborate on building a more conscious, mindful, maybe ethics for algorithms, for digitalization, and for direction of technology. So there is dark side of it, potential dark side, but at the same time, I believe that there are enough of I think solidarity around the world that we can kind of change the direction of technology for good.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, one of the, the danger is to view it as only negative, and that's a trade-off. So in order to survive, we have to trade off our data and our liberties for, to allow us to fight Corona better, so we survive. But actually, there's no reason you can not have both. So Sandy Pentland, who's a researcher at MIT, has this very good analysis where he says, well, actually, he calls it, if you're trying to figure out who has Corona, and you're trying to figure out its spread, you want to do some statistics, for example, which is very normal in the you want answers, not data. You want to know about, is it spreading? How fast is it spreading? How many people are getting sick? I don't necessarily need to monitor all your Zoom conversations to know that. I don't need to necessarily monitor all of your movements with your mobile phone. That's currently being done in Israel and probably being done in a lot of other places. And it's all about not focusing on the individual, but focusing on the collective. And we have lots of techniques from machine learning and from privacy enhancing technologies about how to basically get the results you want from big data mining, doing statistics, which would allow us to understand the spread of Corona without necessarily just throwing up everyone's movements over the last 3 weeks in a giant database, which could then be hacked, and then people and it could be exposed and endanger people. So for example, it's a very obvious case. A lot of what we as technologists have to do is to explain some of the obvious problems. So it may sound like a good idea. You say, well, why don't I just self-track my phone, right? So I can prove that I'm obeying the Corona restrictions. And I'll just put that on the internet. Anyone can tell where I am at any given moment. And that sounds nice. But we already had some Internet of Things houses do that sort of behavior. It would track when you're in your house, when you're not in your house.
Yes. And
it was public. And then what actually happened is, house robbers would look at that database and go, oh, now we know when he's out of the house. Let's rob his house while he's out of the house. So it's a very fear-driven approach, but it is true that there are these negative downsides, which are quite real to not kind of using the technology properly. That being said, we also have a lot of positive developments due to Corona. So, historically, people have really doubted science, even things that seem as obvious as climate change. People are like, oh, it's not really a big deal. The scientists are exaggerating. They're making stuff up. And, and countries were ignoring climate change. The US had withdrawn from the treaty, wasn't very much progress being made. And now it ends up the scientists were right. They were right that Corona was a real threat. And maybe if people believe scientists about Corona, they'll believe scientists about topics in the future, like climate change. And, and then if people will believe scientists about Corona, and it's clear it's a global problem, what we need increased global coordination to fix the problem. No single country has the technological capabilities to beat this virus. And that's why I'm really happy to see things like the PEPTID effort, privacy enhancing contact tracing, being pushed together by the European Union, where different countries are going to get, let's develop joint software and joint standards to do things like contact tracing, figure out who's talked to who, so if they're infected, that they can warn other people in a way which basically keeps all of the data on their local device, their phone, and doesn't put all the data in a big database in the sky. Currently, the tools being put forward by MIT to do this in the United States simply hand the data over to a central health authority, which, who knows if you really want to trust that under Trump. Trump's very anti-immigrant, has had all sorts of misuse of data about American citizens and immigrants. That being said, we can develop the government of Singapore, which has been one of the more successful countries in defeating Corona, had a government mandated app which let people do contact tracing and kept it all on their phone, didn't hand the data over in a non-encrypted fashion to the Singaporean government. And I think that's a great model. I hope Europe and other countries jointly work on this kind of what I would call responsible and mindful data collection, how to do this stuff right so it doesn't hurt accidentally the people that you care about. And I think we can do that. And I hope and that's one of the things, Nym Technologies, we built a mixed network. It basically disguises data traffic. So when I send you a message, it's like I'm sending you a little packet, like a mail packet. And what our network does, it's called a mixed network. It takes lots of little packets that get sent from different people and mixes them up, shuffles them like a deck of cards, and then sends them out again. And this basically prevents timing and other metadata from being observed by outside enemies or adversaries, or just people you don't want to know who's talking to who. And it was really very funny incident. Yesterday, I got an email from a friend. He said, "Oh, look at this." I looked at it, and some anonymous person over the internet who I didn't even know made a specification about how to use a MixNet, the software we've been working on independently, to do privacy preserving contact tracing. And we were mostly, to be honest, looking at cryptocurrency before that. So we were very happy that someone we didn't know had independently looked at Corona, thought of a solution. We also had a part of that solution. And I think that's this sort of bottom-up crowdsourcing techniques are really important in defeating Corona, because rather than divide people with borders and divide people with nationalist rhetoric, none of which really seem to be working very well in terms of stopping Corona, basically says, well, we have all this untapped human potential that we can touch and we can harness via tools for collective intelligence. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the MixNet and privacy preserving contact tracing, because the key with collective intelligence is no one knows everything, but everyone knows some part, and together we can solve these huge problems.
Really interesting expansion and elaboration. Do you have any kind of perspective on how can you or scale what you develop at Nym Technologies for future? Like how are you actively trying to kind of propose your solution to governments or to other bodies, or implement it right now during the crisis?
Yeah, so this is a more political question, but I would say what we our research was originally funded by the Panoramics Project and Next Leap, which were European Commission projects. So we're very thankful for that level of support. And we imagine that, the obvious people that would want to use privacy technology are people who are afraid of being spied on. So, example, if I'm a bureaucrat from the European Union in Brussels, it's one of the most spied on countries, which I think is in the world. And people in Brussels would want to defend their email defend their communication from outside observers. That being said, what was really funny is the people that were actually the most interested after we kind of finished the research were the cryptocurrency. And it's interesting. So cryptocurrency shows some of the limits of how different nation states not coordinating. So different, when Corona happened, there's a huge economic crisis, stock market collapses. A lot of people are going to lose jobs. And the governments in a non-coordinated fashion just start, randomly printing money, trying to do bailouts. Some countries do it better than others. Other countries ignore the problem. And there was this really funny meme on the internet where people said, well, what does money really, how can you do it? Money means you can't just print money. Money means value, and it's this way we, coordinate products and services and supply and demand. And the meme just said, well, I'm the Fed, the Federal Reserve of the US. I'm just going to make the money machine go burr by just printing trillions of dollars, and who cares? And cryptocurrency came as a response to that. So cryptocurrency basically has, I would say, three things that separate it from normal currency. And it's things that even government should take very seriously. One thing is that it tries to be what they call hard money. It tries to mean that you can't just print it kind of in an unlimited fashion. You have to have this do this cryptographic puzzle, which is something done by something called a miner, which kind of like mining gold, mines Bitcoin. The second thing is there's no central bank which can be shut down. There's a consensus, a distributed consensus that doesn't have a single leader about how much money is in everyone's accounts. And the last part of the system, which is maybe the most interesting, is that it's decentralized. So each person can broadcast their transactions in a peer-to-peer network, unlike the web, which is more like a web server and a web browser. And this lets it be censorship resistance. So this means that if I want to stop you from sending money to someone, I can't. I can try. There's no central authority which can do that, and that's actually really important. Where you see, a lot of people don't have access to banking. They don't have access to bank accounts. They're in a lot of trouble. And this is a really big deal, something that we need to solve as a society. And some random guy on the internet solved it with Bitcoin. So currently, we were scaling our software by using Bitcoin as our fundamentals. And then basically, it stopped working. Insofar as that we now have discovered that maybe Corona is more important. So we're going to focus on Corona and see if we can do this privacy-preserving contact tracing. Does that make sense? So we're trying to scale up by first with the Bitcoin, and can we make Bitcoin more private, more resistant? And now we're looking at Corona, and there'll be more problems that will scale up over time. And so I think, and all this is really, I think Corona really has led us to think about mindfulness, and also, more basic things about life, such as really, what does money really mean? What is really valuable? Is it your social connections? Is it your relationships? Is it your connection to the outside world? Is it your government? Is it your safety, your health? Is that more important than your money in your bank or your job? And these sort of things are now, I think, being actively questioned more by wider society.
Very interesting. Thank you, Harry. I just want to kind of wrap up a little bit here on the points that you made on one question that comes to my mind is that if you focus on cryptocurrency and its potential right now, for example, given the highly contagious nature of this COVID-19 and the limits on contact with people, real contact with people, also real solid contact with money. Do you think that somehow cryptocurrency could be a solution for future pandemics? Because there are likely to be future pandemics as well, because given this impacts of climate change and the likelihood of spillover from this corona or other types of viruses to human population. So do you think that there is kind of an avenue for bringing cryptocurrency more into mainstream, or governments can do that, or what is your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, cryptocurrency poses a real possible solution with both negatives and positives for this crisis over the future of cash. So, a lot of us took cash for granted. We could get it from the bank, we used to pay for things. It's been around for a very long time. And so a lot of our transactions were in cash, and there's moves to make people use credit cards more often. There are some restaurants in the Netherlands, for example, and other places, they don't take cash more, they only take credit card. But the majority of places still do. But again, the problem is that I think it has been shown that Corona is passed by cash. It's passed by, I'm infected, I give you a dollar bill or euro or whatever it is you happen to have locally, and that can transmit disease to you. And so over the last year or two, a lot of governments have been looking at, I think first England, but they didn't do anything. And then China, which seems much more serious. And even Tunisia claimed to have the e-dinar. I don't think that's exactly true. Russia, and now even the United States in their latest Corona bill had this thing called digital dollar. And so the fundamental blockchain technologies that we in my company use, and we try to make more privacy enhanced, these technologies might be used by governments to basically digitize their current national banking infrastructure. And it looks like, I would say that's going to happen probably the next year or so. I'm not sure who will do it first. Maybe China, maybe the United States, maybe Europe, you never know. But I think it's probably going to happen. And now there's a danger. And this danger is that if you think about one of the nice things about blockchains, it's transparent who has given who money, and that how much money you have in your account. No bank can hide that from you. But that being said, the whole world can see that. And that's kind of dangerous. You may not want the whole world to know how much money you have in your bank account and who you're sending money to. This could be very sensitive personal private information. You may even not necessarily criminal. For example, you may just want, a friend of yours might be broke. You need to send her money back home. That should be legal, but your friend may not want to know, for the world to know, that she's having financial problems. And currently cash is actually pretty private, while cryptocurrency is not private. There's a few efforts, Zcash, Monero, and you can look at these. But what we were hoping to do is we were hoping to basically help make cryptocurrencies private. And if they're made private, then you can have sensitive personal and sensitive business and sensitive government transactions happen on these blockchains. So I hope as countries create these new kinds of blockchains in order to essentially eliminate cash, they don't replace them with something worse, which essentially is putting everyone's bank account and their bank transfers open to the public and making a massive surveillance machine out of it, either to the public or maybe only that they can read it. But instead, they make a genuinely private blockchain-based system. And I think that people have a lot more trust in this. But I want to bring up this funny anecdote about blockchain technology, which I think the Corona brings up. So the weird thing about Bitcoin is a lot of people did make a lot of money, and people are still making lots of money. And these are, small companies are founded. Binance, one of our founders, they went from zero to $500 million in profit, which is, as large as JP Morgan, in, a year. Okay, that's almost unheard of. And random people, including myself, people giving me Bitcoin over the internet, and I had never really taken it seriously. I thought it was a bit of a joke. All of a sudden, 2017, I open up and like, wow, I have, tens of thousands. This money, which was given to me as a joke, is now worth tens of thousands of dollars. I actually took all that money and founded the company with that money. But then a friend of mine said, well, historically in European societies, they have this connection between hard work and money. So they say, if you work harder, you'll make more money. And the weird thing with Bitcoin is people that didn't work very hard at all, who just someone gave them some of this stuff, all of a sudden it seemed irrationally to be worth, you know, tons of money. So there'd be, you know, some guy who'd been working really hard, building real value in a real company for years, and maybe wasn't that successful, only had a few customers, small business, and he wouldn't be a millionaire. But some random guy from the internet who's not particularly intelligent and maybe is, you know, just due to this kind of weird democracy of Bitcoin, would just become a millionaire. And I think that's something that we as society need to think about is how do we reward people in a way that makes sense and in a way that really reflects kind of resilience and human values. So Bitcoin is clearly resilient. You can knock a node off and another one comes back on. But then the fact that the market gives Bitcoin such weird values that go up and down every day, that doesn't seem very reflective, at least myself, of how I think about value and the kinds of relationships and products and people and places that I value. And so there does need to be some fundamental disconnect that maybe Corona's brought also into highlight about how we value things, how we value our time, and maybe we can't value those things in money.
Something very interesting that bring it up again, something that you mentioned previously about the likelihood increase of unemployment across the world, but also connected to what you just mentioned about this fundamental shift of value that is happening, maybe is happening around the world, but we're also witnessing it with connection with cryptocurrency, for example. How do you think that we can use this opportunity as a way to create a culture of entrepreneurship, a culture that encourages people to not be dependent on a single source of income and become more creative, become more active, resilient, and proactive in their lives, basically? So using this opportunity as this platform for change.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to rethink how we work. You know, even today, you know, friends of mine are in the United States, at least, are messaging me saying, "Oh, I just lost my job." Tons of people losing their jobs, and it's hitting poor people first, but it's going to go up. So friends of mine who are, for example, talented tech reporters who are saying because of Corona, advertising has collapsed, and they're worried that they're going to lose their job next week. So it's a pretty scary situation. That being said, like, you know, humans, we are very creative and we value each other and each other's times. And I think humans are natural entrepreneurs. They are naturally problem solvers. So if we can basically rethink our values and move it from this kind of short-term thinking, profit-driven society to society that really focuses on resilience, on really what matters, and really making products and services and values that matter. That could be exactly the kind of shift we need to really let a lot of new entrepreneurs happen, but maybe not entrepreneurs in the traditional sense, but entrepreneurs in the way that I think a lot of people are, for example, around social impact or collaborative economies, cooperatives. There might be a whole new kinds of entrepreneurship that Corona enables. And I think we should, as a society and the governments, hopefully they don't totally collapse due to, you know, overprinting money or inability to deal with Corona, rather than letting society just collapse, there should be a lot of focus on how can we enable people, you know, in the simple ways like universal basic income. You know, Andrew Yang and other people, Trump is doing it. They're sending $1,200 a month to Americans. You know, there's small business loans in Europe. But, you know, what I've noticed, which is quite bad, is as a startup, you know, people only take risk when they feel safe historically. So if you're an entrepreneur, it's really easy to take risk if you feel safe. You feel everything else is going well, so I can take this risk with my life. And now everything's not going well. People are really freaked out. The world, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? And so can we really find ourselves and can we support others that have the courage to take risk in this situation? And I hope we as a society can do it. I'd like to actually know, as we end, what's your feeling, Shima, on how mindfulness and mindfulness engineering can help build this culture of entrepreneurship?
Well, for me, thank you so much for asking this. I think my perspective is that the mindfulness engineering had three components: was to build a resilient person, a resilient living space, and a resilient interface. So all components they have to have some preconditions to show resilient behavior. In my perspective right now, what is really important is to, as you also just mentioned in all the points that you made, is to promote bottom-up basically movements, encourage people and empower rather than focusing on the economy that was not sustainable. The economy, previous system of economy has proved to not be sustainable. It had caused so much problems. And I think what you're witnessing right now, it's just the lack of resilience of previous phase of performance. So to me is more really a radical change, or maybe a paradigm shift in the mindset of people, and empowering citizens. Of course, they have lost their jobs, but I think the skill set is still there. So kind of course, I mean, if you're a reporter, maybe you've lost your job, but your skills are still there, intact. So in a system that is more, I think you said it very interestingly, to reward people based on the skill set and contributions to society. So it becomes more a society of service-driven society, value-driven society, rather than a profit-oriented society. I think this way, and I think it's more of personal agency, because right now I think many people are left on their own. They have to kind of tap into their own internal resilience, and every person has resiliency in them. So kind of, I think, more empowering people at a very kind of basic of society, not just with money and the materials that we need, but also psychologically. So this is what I feel right now. It's the way kind of creating spaces that are more promoting more of consciousness and awareness at an individual level.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think it's going to take, the corona has been a bit of a wake-up call, both around things like privacy, things like resilience, and things about what really our fundamental values are. And so thanks so much for the interview, Shima.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for the audience for listening to us. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share. Thank you and goodbye.
Take care.